Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Road to 2000. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and I'll be your driver on this journey. Sorry about the delay getting started here tonight. We had to track down some equipment, but we're up and running now. And I have good news. I won a chess tournament. I won the Amateur in Premier, otherwise known as the Premier in Amateur, over the weekends. And so I wanted to share some of my more interesting games from that event, because there were some instructive mistakes going on, and I think it's worthwhile to go through these games. So the one I wanted to start with is probably the most complex one of the event for me. I was playing Prateek Nemmali, who I think is a high schooler in the area. Maybe he just graduated. And he's pretty decent. He's, I think, around 2100 USCF and FIDE. And he had the white pieces against me. Now, Prateek played the move 1e4, and I went into the Caro-Kann, and I sort of knew what to expect. He pretty much always plays the exchange variation. And then he chose this move, knight to f3. So what do you guys think about this move, knight f3? Any exchange Caro aficionados out there?
I've dipped my feet in the waters.
All right, Tom has dipped his feet. What do you think? What do you think about the move knight f3?
I love seeing it whenever I'm playing the black pieces.
Oh, and why is that?
Because I get to pin it.
Yeah, so Bobby Fischer was a huge fan of the exchange Caro-Kann, but he would always play it with a very specific idea of making it difficult for black to develop this bishop. So you would see much more often the move bishop d3 from Fischer. And now after, black is going to continue development, like let's say knight c6, knight f6, maybe white plays this move bishop f4, and it's not so easy to develop the bishop. Sometimes players with the white pieces will even play the move h3 here, just to fully take away all of the squares for your pieces. Now, in the game, he chose this move knight f3, and this move order is adopted by players with the white pieces sometimes, because the move bishop g4 is still, slightly premature, I would say. h3 has been chosen, bishop f4 has been chosen, and generally, you get this kind of trade-off where if black gets the bishop out to g4, white gets the bishop to f4, and makes playing the natural developing idea of bishop d6 a little bit harder, because white got to the diagonal first. So players with the black pieces generally start with developing one of the knights, which is what I did. And then in my analysis, I'd only seen this move c3. And now if you go bishop to g4, white has this nice line, this nice idea of going queen to b3. And this is something you always really want to be looking out for in any kind of opening where you move the queen's pawns and develop the queen side bishop early on. You need to be checking for these ideas of your light squares being loose on the queen side if you're black, or your dark squares being loose if you're white. You see the b2 pawn be weak, the b7 pawn be weak. This diagonal can also end up being weak. So I had seen this position before, and I was intending to play this move queen to c7. So what's going on with queen to c7? Why would black potentially choose this move over the move bishop g4? Yeah, Tom?
Ooh, to stop bishop f4, the natural developing idea.
Yeah, to stop bishop f4. So that is what I sort of planned going in, and to be honest, I didn't do much prep beyond that. It's an exchange Caro-Kann. You sort of know what's going to be going on. You can play with the ideas. But my opponent sort of surprised me with the move bishop d3. I hadn't checked this move specifically, and it turns out that against this move, probably black should play bishop to g4. Now, of course, why is bishop g4 better here than it was in the other position? Any ideas?
No queen b3.
No queen b3. It's that simple.
I agree.
So you already see it's move like 4 or 5, but some pretty serious mistakes have already been made by both players. So it's really important to understand these nuances step by step as far as what's going on in these early opening moves and why the mainline move orders are the way that they are. It's really helpful to understand these differences, and that's going to help you get the most from your openings. Now, I sort of had my plan going in, and I didn't really think much about bishop d3 because there's still nothing wrong with queen c7. So I chose this line anyways, but perhaps a little bit of a missed opportunity with this move bishop to g4. Now, very quickly, my opponent played the move h3, saying, I'm not going to give you a second chance. Your chance to come to g4 is gone. So now, black to move, how do you want to develop your pieces? There's really two different setups you can adopt here. Maybe even three setups you can go for. What do you think, Nate?
Play a move like G6 and then put your bishop on G7, and then you want your other bishop to go to F5 then, supported by the pawn?
Yeah, this is a plan that I've actually played quite often. However, there's a particular reason why maybe it doesn't make quite as much sense here. And that reason is we've spent a tempo with queen to c7. So with this move, we're very distinctly saying we want to control this diagonal, and that's the diagonal we want to put our bishop on. Now, if we wanted to play like that, we could do so here. We could play knight f6, let's say h3 anyways, g6, bishop f4, bishop g7. And now we don't really mind this bishop on f4 because, you know, we weren't putting our bishop there anyways. So because of that, while this is one of the main ways to set up your pieces, I didn't want to go for it here because I've already chosen queen c7. I've sort of made that choice against that setup already. So how else do we finish our development? Not a trick question. What are the normal looking moves?
Knight f6 and then e5.
Knight f6, and you want to go for e5.
Play bishop d6.
With bishop d6. Yeah.
d6, e6 with the bishops and then castle.
Right. So maybe, you know, your opponent gets castled first. Maybe you're not quite ready to play e5 just yet, though, right? Because, you know, e5, it can get captured, and your opponent's rook is in the center, your king is in the center, you still haven't castled. Gonna look a little bit scary for you, right? In fact, I think tactically here, you know, this is already big danger. Big danger. Maybe not lost, but dangerous. So I didn't really want to go for that. So now, instead, you can choose the move e6, and let's just say normal moves. You can go bishop d6. But long term, what's the issue here? What's the issue with this setup? Yeah, the light squared bishop. So we can sort of think ahead and form a plan here. We know that we know normal ways to set up our pieces, but eventually we have to do something with this bishop. So your idea was to eventually play e5. And I like this idea. However, in the long term, let's say, you know, we get a few free moves. Let's say white sort of doesn't do much, plays c3. We can play e5, but it's going to leave us with a structural weakness, right? What's the structural weakness when you play e5? Yeah, it's going to leave you with the isolani here. And perhaps this is going to give white some kind of small plus if we have to deal with our isolated pawn. I'm going to claim that there is a better way of going about this e5 plan, a better way to set up our other pieces to help support this plan. Well, yeah, it is f6, but you're not going to play f6 first. Yeah. So we want to develop our pieces such that we can go f6, e5. So we're actually going to start with the move e6. It's going to look very normal. My opponent played c3. We go bishop d6, castles, and then the key here is what we do with our kingside knight. So of course, rather than put it on f6, where we're going to put our pawn, it can come to e7. So now it helps support the center. We have the long-term plan of f6, e5, breaking through the center. And again, let me just put some nonsense moves on the board. Knight f1. Let's say eventually we get e5. Now, of course, we're not leaving ourselves with a weakness because we have a central pawn duo, which is much, much better than the isolated pawn, which can be weak and get attacked. So that's the long-term planning going on in the early stages of the game here. So this all happened in the game. I go knight g e7. And my opponent plays rook to e1. Now, what move do you want to play here, just automatically? Castles is automatic. But what happens if you play castles automatically?
Bishop takes h7.
Yeah, so that's the question, right? So, of course, by virtue of not putting this knight on the most natural square of f6, we've left our king side a little bit more vulnerable. But that being said, the Greek gift doesn't work all the time, right? Doesn't work all the time. Brian knows. Brian, who's in the audience today, had a game where his opponent did a very bad Greek gift sacrifice and was just down a piece. So let's try to calculate. Can you castle? Is bishop takes h7 working? That's your first problem to solve of the game. Everything else, you know, I sort of knew going in. I knew I wanted to put my knight on e7. I was going to play for this plan. But this was my first problem to solve over the board. So let's pose the challenge to you.
Never works.
One vote for never works. So let's start with the obvious. Okay, let's put it on the board. Takes, takes. Knight g5. Can you play the move king g8 here?
No.
No. Why not?
Because after queen h5, we cannot cover the h7 to b1 diagonal.
Right.
We can't cover it at all. And the knight can't cover h7 either.
So whenever this sacrifice happens, the only way that you get away with it is if after queen h5, you know, somehow you can either bring a knight to f6 to defend, you can bring a bishop to the diagonal or a queen to the diagonal. You need some way to cover this h7 square. Really no other way to get out. You can try to move your rook, but this will happen to you first, and this is just no fun. I'm going to fail to find checkmate immediately, but no fun. So, of course, we have to go up. So can we go to h6? Obviously not, because our opponent has this really strong attacking piece on c1. We would lose a queen immediately. So your challenge is to calculate what happens after king g6. That's what's going to tell you if black can get away with castling here. And I'm going to be really mean and make you look from this position. And you saw the move that I played in the game, but hopefully that doesn't reveal the answer. So can you castle? Or is king g6 not enough to defend your king?
I know what I should say.
And if you're going to tell me that you're allowed to castle, you have to tell me what your defense is. Those are the rules. And if you're going to tell me that I can't castle, you have to tell me what the winning line for white is. Because if you can castle, probably you should.
I'll give it a shot.
What do you think, Nate?
Let's say you can castle.
Okay. So how do you defend?
All right. I was thinking after king to g6.
Yep.
I thought his best move was queen to g4.
I agree. Queen g4 definitely looks like the most testing idea.
And then I thought I would play f6 and try and have my king run through f7.
f6. Okay, so I'm going to let you know. I think you lose your queen in that variation. So let's put it on the board. So you're correct. You have the main position in mind. So knight g5, we know that these moves don't work. We know that this move doesn't work, so king g6. And then you're right in thinking that queen to g4 is really the only relevant variation. If he checks you somewhere else, you just go f5, and you're going to be running away to safety, right? No way to get after this king now. If you play something slow, like, I don't know, rook e3, then you're going to play f6, and like you said, you're going to run with your king to f7. But queen g4 actually prevents the move f6, because we have this discovered attack on your king. So queen g4, you need something better. f5, but of course you don't stop calculating just when you attack your opponent's queen. What does white do?
96 anyway.
Whoa, 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 knight e6. We take.
Knight takes, bishop takes.
I got two guys.
I'm not hitting your knight.
Yeah. I got two guys. So knight e6, not good enough. Yeah, queen h4, of course. And I got this far in my head. This is where I got. And I was thinking, and I was thinking, and I wasn't 100% sure. So it turns out black does have a good move here and is just winning. But I wasn't able to find it in my head during the game. So I'll give you guys a chance. It's not at all obvious, at least not to me.
Well, if he's there, can't you go, I might be missing, but bishop h7 and put him in check just to beat protect?
Yeah, you can put him in check, but he'll move.
Um,
And then all the same problems are still here.
And a new problem on H2.
Right. We'll look from here. Yeah, it looks kind of tough, right? How am I going to get my king out? I'm blocked over here. You know, my opponent is threatening at least one check, and maybe there's nothing after the check, but still looks scary, right? So, all right, do you guys give up? I gave up in the
I
game.
don't give up. I think it's bishop d7.
Bishop d7?
Yep, I'm not scared of no ghost.
Bishop d7 might be okay.
I'm not scared of no ghost.
Did you consider this move?
Yes. My idea is I'm going to play queen c8.
Queen c8. Okay, I'm gonna do any number of things. My goodness. Take your rook with check.
Oh, wait, that's
take your
check.
guy.
Okay. I missed queen g5. We're going to pretend like I never said that.
Okay. Bishop d7 might honestly be okay for you. Takes, you can take.
This is the only thing I
Takes,
looked at.
you have rook f6, right?
This is
But
the only thing I looked at.
you know, I was
didn't
thinking
see
in
that.
my head, there's stuff, there's like takes, and like other stuff, and other stuff. Wasn't so sure. Turns out there's a really clean move here, and that move is f4. Tough to find. The idea is really simple. You want to bring your king, your knight's in the way, so you want to move your knight, so you move your knight here. And if queen back to g4, we go king f6. Do we go king f6? No, we go king h6. That's right. And wait, never mind, that's a draw. Never mind, f4, queen g4, I like still don't see the idea.
I see the idea. You play e5.
You play e5? You sure?
You play king f7. Don't even worry about it. You don't even need our rook. Oh, wait, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
That's too
maybe
much stuff.
maybe this
That's
is
too much
no. This is probably correct actually. This is probably the line, and you pick up the knight. But pretty tough, right?
Actually, wait, no, that is a lot of combo, isn't it?
Pretty tough. So I have this position in my head. I'm like, I need to make it so I have a really clean defense in this position, right? So what move would be really great if it didn't hang a rook?
Rook to h8.
Wow, rook h8 would be amazing. It would be winning a queen if it didn't hang a rook. So, in this position, what move do you guys want to play?
Bishop to d7.
That's what I wanted to play. So there you go. That's how you arrive at the move bishop d7. You want a castle, you're worried about this line, so you have to decide, how can I make it so this line is not so scary? And the answer is bishop to d7. My opponent played my opponent played a4. I castled. Now my opponent thought forever. And I'm pretty sure he was just calculating exactly what we just looked at. So we'll go to the same position. And of course, there's rook h8. And absolutely nothing doing for white. In fact, white is just dead lost. So there you go. We solved our first problem of the game. We managed to castle and avoid dying to the Greek gift.
Gold star.
So my opponent thought forever, played knight b to d2. And here comes my first big mistake. So, I was aware of a number of plans here for the player with the white pieces. Surprisingly, there's this slightly counterintuitive move c4 that can occasionally be very strong. The reason being, our bishop is quite bad, and white is willing to accept this weakness on d4 in order to jump in with the knight, start targeting our pieces while we've slightly misplaced them. Right, our knight on e7 looks slightly weird, and the white pieces are jumping in. But this c4 idea is normally not so scary. White actually has a couple other pretty dangerous ways to play. So what happened in the game was my opponent just played normally. He played like knight f1, developed his pieces, tried to checkmate me, just normal stuff. but there is a very concrete way that I thought white was threatening to play here. So let's say I play some move. Say I play f6. I'm going to give you guys whiplash. White to move here. What kind of ideas are you looking at?
I just literally want to play b4 the second I can play it.
So why do you want to play b4?
I'm all about that space.
All about that space. Okay.
All about that space.
So, well, I mean, what's the follow-up? What are you doing?
I'm playing b5.
Playing b5 right away?
And then knight b3, knight c5.
Okay, so you want to go b4, b5, knight b3, knight c5. So all is well. Let's put b4 on the board. Let's say I play some normal move.
Maybe now I play knight b3.
Knight b3. So why knight b3 instead of b5?
Well, because now I can clog that c5 square up really good.
Well, there's something wrong with b5.
Well, because we give away knight a5, knight c4.
Yeah, knight a5 is very, very nice for black. So whenever you're expanding on the queen side like this, you don't really want to give away those kinds of squares. But I totally agree with you. I was worried about b4. Now it turns out in this position, b4 is not so scary for black. It's just fine. It's one of the ideas for white. It's a fine idea for white, but it's not so scary. So how can black kind of deal with this? I think you can actually play a5 here. Now b5 is sort of necessary. And after something like knight to b3, you're not actually coming to this square just yet. And I think I'm going to be in time to organize my pieces and find counterplay of my own. So we get this sort of fight on the queen side. And I wasn't super happy with allowing this. Okay, so whiplash again, look out. So what move do you think I played here?
b5.
Yeah, a5. Just stopping the idea before I have to worry about it. But it turns out there's a really funny idea here for white. So just to remind you of the game, knight bd2, a5.
I understand the idea. It's knight b1, knight a3, knight b5.
Yeah. So the only way to try to play for an edge with white here is to come back. Really hard to do if you're playing over the board, to develop your knight and then undevelop your knight. So of course the downside to a5 is that it has allowed a weakness on the b5 square.
You played this, right?
He did not play this.
Oh. I've been like literally crushed like this before I played the Caro, and like I just like do this, but like my opponent did play knight b1 and b, like they just played the 2 moves and then I do it.
Yeah, I mean you kind of have to do it quickly. Like I'm doing active things on the other side of the board if
Because
you do
just
this.
Kind of play like you just like move like knight. Do you play like knight d8 f like let's say your opponent ignores it? Do you play like f6 knight d8 knight f7 e5 or something?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Like okay, so like if they like don't play knight b1 for example.
Okay.
Do
Knight
you
f1 was played in the game.
Yeah, like let's just say something. Do you like have time to play knight d8 f6 knight f7 e5? Or is that just like way too crazy?
Very weird to move the knight to d8 and then f7. So we have our idea. Our idea is f6 e5. So I'm on board with you there. But
We
this
just don't bring knight to f7
Yeah.
is just way too much.
this knight is well placed. It controls the center. It pressures white's center. We don't need to move this knight all over the place. But yeah, but that's what I was intending in the game. So my opponent played knight to f1. Again, this move knight to b1 maybe gave me some problems. So knight to f1 instead, a much more human way, I would say, to approach it. Maybe you spot this idea. Hard to convince yourself it's good after you play the move knight to d2. So I continue out now with f6. Opponent went back with bishops to c2. So he's giving us another problem. So everybody and their grandmother hopefully knows what white's next move is, right? Yeah, queen d3. We've seen this one before. So how do you want to stop it?
I mean, I want to play bishop e8, but knight h5 and knight h4 comes to my dirty line. So like,
Bishop e8 hangs your e-pawn.
also the e-pawn is hanging. You're right.
I would like to play e5, so then if they go queen e3, I would say e4, so you can't play that.
Yeah, that would be ideal. That would be ideal for sure.
It is, yeah, they're just flimsy, right? Because it's
Yeah.
30 pawns, 30
So
and
it's
they really good pieces.
it's flimsy, but if it works, you should actually play this. So you have to calculate concretely that e5 doesn't work. Unfortunately for us, it does not. White takes
I mean,
to allow the queen to attack. Then we get pinned. That's a second attacker. We only have one way to defend this pawn. And then white attacks it again. Pawn is still pinned. We just very concretely lose a pawn here. So e5 would be the ideal solution for us, but we calculate it, doesn't work, got to do something else.
Are we gonna play like knight g6 with a8?
So this is the idea that I came up with in the game. Wanted to go knight g6 and defend my king. Now, in the game, I thought it was smart to start with this move rook f to e8. So why do you think I thought that this was smart? What was I worried about if we go knight g6 right away?
I guess take some queen e3.
Yeah, sometimes white actually takes this knight. And this structure is really bad. It's really not good. And why is it so not good? Well, we have our plan in the position. We want to play e5. And so let's say I pass. We want to play e5, take with the pawn, and have a big center. Now, we do get our big center, but g6, g7, kind of suffering for our king. So I thought it would be a good idea to play this move first, wait for the move queen d3, and then come with knight g6 to f8, never giving my opponent the chance to capture me. And that's actually what happened in the game. However, I do think that white, again, had sort of a more concrete plan here. In the game, my opponent started to kind of stumble and couldn't come up with something active to do. Just sort of gave me a free hand, and then we'll see that eventually the plan of e5 comes through. But here, once again, white could have found something active to do, this time on the king's side rather than the queen's side. So white to move here. See if you can find some way to give black problems. Brian? Pawn h4?
No, knight h4.
You said knight h4?
I said knight. I just said h4.
Just said h4. So that normally means the pawn. So, all right, Tom is playing like my opponent. Opponent played knight h4. This was all according to plan. This is why I moved the rook. Wanted to tuck my knight away on f8. Now, pawn h4 might actually give me some more problems. So what's the idea? What's the idea, Brian?
Play h5.
Okay. Let's say I go knight f8. Are you? I'll do it voluntarily. Do you still want h5?
Am I crazy? I am trying so hard to make knight g5 work. I don't think it'll ever work, but I want it to work so badly.
I mean, I'll play h5.
Okay, h5. I will keep calm, play some moves.
I will play. I'll play knight h4 first, and then I'll play h6.
So h6 is the right idea. Knight h4 first actually helps me.
Is it because you're playing knight g3 after h6 or something?
So I'm actually going to play a better move than knight e7. I'm going to play rook e7. And now the problem is after h6, black's best move might be somewhat surprising to you, but black is actually going to go g5. So this is why knight h4 is sort of not ideal, because you would just lose the tempo on the main line. And the thing is now, you know, the pace of the game is being more dictated by white, right? With this h4, h5, h6 idea, it provokes a ton of weaknesses in my king side. In fact, so many weaknesses, it's going to be really tough to play the move e5 and open things up on this side of the board for me now. So instead, the game's going to take, you know, maybe a slower approach. Might continue out with knight to g6 to follow, and sort of play for more positional ideas, control over the f4 square, for example, and maybe actually Jacob's idea of knight d8 to f7 makes a lot more sense now, since we have a target over here on h6. But with this idea, white could have effectively kind of taken more control over the game, would have been dictating the pace of the game, which objectively makes a small amount of difference. White's position is better here than it is in the main line, but especially practically and psychologically, that's sort of a huge deal. If you're stopping your opponent's plan and they're having to like change their ideas, and you feel like you're in control, it actually becomes a lot easier to find your moves in my experience. So I think that was a little bit of a missed opportunity by Prateek. Instead he played knight h4. I just dropped back with knight to f8. Of course, the tactical justification is if I capture, he takes the knight back, plus the pawn. So I come back to f8. And now my opponent realized he had nothing to do. So we've locked him down on the queen side with our a5 pawn. We've successfully avoided being checkmated by force on the king side. He did not find this idea of pushing the pawn forward, and he put his knight on the side of the board. So Prateek thought for quite a while here and played knight back to f3, which, you know, in hindsight, maybe knight h4 not the best idea, right? Just knight h4 to f3 doesn't make a ton of sense. I came back with knight to e7. So why do you think this move was my choice? I'm improving my pieces. I'm preparing for the e5 break. So what setup am I going for?
I mean, that knight's going to be on g6 now.
It might come to g6. Think of the problems with e5, and think of how I can best position my pieces to meet those problems.
Sometimes the knight protects the pawns.
What are the problems with e5?
Oh, well, your d5 pawn.
My d5 pawn is weak, and sometimes my e5 pawn is weak.
Yeah.
So
Pawn's
how
not weak.
can I bring all of my pieces into the game to help defend these two pawns? Where do my pieces belong? That's the question.
Are you saying b5 or d5?
No, the knight on. I think what he's saying is maybe that knight on e7 stays there, and then on f8 goes to g6. Is that you're defending both of the squares simultaneously?
So there.
G6, knight G6.
So what I'm saying is there are two important squares for you to control when you play the move e5. Two of the most important squares are, of course, d5 and e5. Those are the squares you need to absolutely have under control, because that's where your pawn center is going to be. And you need to have more control than your opponent, otherwise your opponent will capture one of your pawns, and your whole plan falls apart. So that's why we started with this move, knight to e7, because it's a little bit awkward to defend the d5 pawn, so this knight gets involved. Now our knight on f8 is already actually pretty good here. It's defending our king, and it's, you know, allowing us to reposition our other pieces by defending our other weak pawn. So the idea is not necessarily knight to g6. We'll see that maybe later on that'll make sense, but not yet. Now, we talked a lot about the knights, a little bit about the bishops, but we want to involve the rooks as well, right? So how do we make it so the rooks can be useful?
You have a semi-open c file to work with.
Right. I'm not so worried about the c file, though. I need d5 and e5. These are the squares. Yeah, so you bring the rook. What'd you say?
Rook 88.
Yep, that's what I thought. So rook 88, absolutely, that's where this rook belongs. But then you run into this problem where these files are a little bit clogged, right? So how can the rooks be useful? As Yasser says, we need to invite everyone to the party. Bishop c6 was the key move that I was hoping you guys could find. So bishop c6 is sort of really ideal for us. So with knight to e7, we're preparing to bring our bishop to c6, where it's both defending our center and preparing to attack after we move the center pawns even further. It's also, we'll see knight e3 in the game, it's also unclogging the d file, allowing our rook to play in the game. And we'll see it's even clearing up a very useful square for our queen on d7. So that's the setup. So our opponent is doing nothing. He gave up on finding a plan. He's just moving around. Bishop d2, bishop c6, rook c1, queen d7. And suddenly now, first of all, we made a threat over here. Second of all, we have two major pieces ready to help defend our d-pawn. We have our bishop placed on c6, already defending the center and even further. We have our other bishop ready to defend the center. And we have our knight, well placed to defend d5 and also the newly weakened f5 square after we push forward. And so suddenly, we go from this, where e5 sort of seems like a pipe dream. How are you ever going to defend your pawns enough? But once you reposition, you bring everybody to the party, then You have the control that you need. So with queen d7, we made a threat. So my opponent played b3, defending the a4 pawn. And now the question is, should we play e5, or can we improve our position even further? And I'll give you a hint. I chose wrong in the game. Big hints.
I mean, wouldn't knight g6 also protect that square along with freeing up the rook to protect the pawn as well? So you get like a double protection there if you want to move up?
Which knight?
The knight on, I had to ask, I apologize.
This one?
No, the other one.
This one?
Yeah.
So perhaps it might make sense to bring this knight out, actually. But this knight on e7 is actually helping us control d5. And that's kind of more important than e5. We have a lot of control over e5, not quite as much over e5. Yep.
Would it be good to drop the bishop back to c7?
Right. That's what I thought. So I thought, I thought there was no rush. I thought we could play bishop c7. How does this improve our position? Well, now there's actually nothing in the way of our major pieces defending our d-pawn. And I thought I could just play slowly and then get e5, e4, this nice leisurely pace, and play some chess. Now, it turns out that this isn't quite as strong as playing e5 just directly. Now, we have everything defended. There's actually no way that white can really even threaten to take our pawns after takes. We open things up. We're ready to push through with e4. White's in big trouble already. You have to play awkward moves like queen to f1 to get out of the way of this idea. Something like knight to f5, I think, is actually just going to lose a piece immediately. Like, you just can't play actively here with white. And it's big trouble. Big trouble. So should have just played e5. I played slowly instead with bishop to c7. My opponent played knight to f1, which now, of course, is stopping e5 because, while we do have d5 defended a billion times, e5 is now the weak point. So back to chess. I did bring the knight from e7 to g6 now, like you were suggesting, actually. And the reason is our opponent dropped this knight back, no longer attacking this guy, and we open these guys up, so now it does make sense to bring him over. We don't need him on d5, so we use him over here instead. My opponent played knight to g3. And here, again, I can go e5. The move I played is also actually very good for black. Just came in with knight f4. So just playing slowly. I have this e5 plan whenever I want it, and I'm just trying to misplace my opponent's pieces a little bit further. Opponent came back with queen to f1. I bring out my other knight, just trying to slowly but surely push forward, get ready for e5. My opponent played knight to e2. Now I come out with queen to d6. So again, just improving my pieces to the maximum before we break through. Now my opponent plays g3. I was worried about these types of ideas. Remember when it was our opponent threatening that? Now it's us. So he goes g3, take, and finally, it's time for e5. So I play it, and there's no other way really to improve the pieces further. So I decided it was finally time. Turns out I had 1 or 2 moments before this even to play e5, as I mentioned, but doing it here, also very strong. So remember earlier when I talked about how this pawn structure was super bad? It's still true. But in this case, we have the bishop pair. We have our pieces on pretty much ideal squares, supporting the center pawns, ready to push them further down the board. And because of that, black is doing very well. Now my opponent is a very practical and tricky player, and he said, I don't care about your center, I'm going to come checkmate you. So knight g5, and we have our next mistake of the game by me. So what is our opponent doing? How is he coming to get us?
Is he trying to play some queen g4 knight e6 stuff or something?
Queen f3.
Because like queen f3 just seems like it isn't more than enough.
Yeah, So queen f3 is not quite enough. We have rooks ready to step to the f file to defend us. Queen g4 is a little bit threatening. Knight e6, not really going to be a big problem, though. We have e6 well defended. So what's the idea?
Well, I want to get my, if I'm white, I want to get the knight eventually to f7.
Yeah,
He's protected.
it's
You gotta protect him.
it's just not really feasible here. You gave up your light squared bishop, so this f7 square, I have all my major pieces here. I can defend it in 8 different ways, right? But queen g4 comes with another threat.
Oh, F4.
No. Don't go psycho. Don't go psycho. Yeah, queen h4. That's exactly right. It's very simple, right? Back to the h7 square. It's the same checkmating pattern we've seen before. But this time now, I'm out of knights to help defend my king. No more knights on f8, right? No more safety. So the question is, how much do you care about that plan, right? If you don't care about that plan, you can keep going in the center. If you do care about that plan, it might be worth a tempo to slow it down or stop it altogether. So what do you think? That's the new question. And it's the next question that I got wrong during the game.
Queen
Queen
d7.
d7?
Queen d7 and just prevent.
Exactly. That is the best move. Queen g4 turns out to be a pretty dangerous threat, one that I kind of underestimated during the game. And so it's very useful here to just take some time, play queen to d7, stop queen to g4. If your opponent tries to attack you some other way, go queen to f5. Say, what are you doing? I have control over the position. I have the center. I have the bishops. I can again go back to playing slowly, take some time to defend my king, and then move on. And here black is, again, just doing very, very, very well. Now in the game, no respect for queen g4. I said, I am going to break through in the center and checkmate you on the light squares because you gave me your light squared bishop. My opponent said, go ahead and try. I said, OK, I'll try. He said, just kidding, don't do it. And this was all correct. Now I took on c3. I need to open the position up, activate my pieces while he's trying to checkmate me. I've made some weaknesses around my king, but so has white, of course. And my opponent found this really good move, actually, bishop to e3. In the game, I didn't really expect this, but turns out this bishop is very, very dangerous on the e3 square. Not so dangerous on the c3 square. So this is where I thought for the longest during the game. And a little bit of a note on time management. In the game, my opponent had, I think, 5 or fewer minutes here, within 5 minutes of running out of time. I had 40 minutes on my clock, I believe. And whenever that's the case, who knows the best way to manage your time? In a complicated position, you're up more than half an hour, your opponent has very little time. What's the best way to put on pressure?
Bullet.
Take your half hour.
Find the best one.
Take all your time.
Yeah.
Okay, take all your time, but how do you want to spend it? Do you want to, slowly over the course of the next few moves?
Oh, you mean how you play the position, you're saying?
Well, yeah, now how do you spend your time?
I spend my time
Spend the
looking at
time
my opponent's
practicing? What do
play.
you mean?
Okay, so I'm sorry. Giving some leading questions that turned out to be misleading. So the best way, in my opinion, to spend your time in this kind of situation is to spend all of your time up front. You want to calculate as much as you can here, be as sure as you can up front, because your opponent doesn't know what you're going to play. They don't know what you're calculating. You have a ton of options here as black. And if you figure out as much as you can from here, then you feel like you know everything. You surprise your opponent somewhere along the way, or get surprised if you didn't calculate as well as you thought. And then you're really putting on the pressure on the clock. So here I thought for a very, very long time, probably went down to around 15 minutes. Maybe I had a bit more than 15, but then I played queen b3. And now the second half of this is that after white plays the obvious move, queen to h4, you continue playing quickly, right? You've calculated the line. You want to keep the pressure on him so he doesn't have time to find the best move in any of these positions. And that's how you can use your time really effectively to get a good position. So here, I actually played the wrong move, though. Played rook to d7.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to go crazy.
Now, rook to d7 is very nearly the best move. Rook d3 is the best move. So what's the idea with either of these moves? The idea is that my king needs a path to safety on the queen's side. That path doesn't really exist going this way in front of the rook for reasons that we will see, namely because queen f5 happens. But it does exist in this case. Now here, my opponent missed his only chance to be better. Only chance to be better. So take a second, try to find it. This is sort of an impossible task in the remaining time we have in the class, but it's worth thinking about. So I will give you a hint. Or what do you think, Eric? No. I'll give you a hint. What is black playing after queen h7, queen h8?
King e7.
Oh, so you play bishop c5.
That's what Eric thought, but hold on. What are we doing here?
King e7.
You want to go king e7. But king e7, I think, is going to be dangerous, right? It's going to be a little bit dangerous, at least. Let me take a moment, make sure I'm not doing things horribly, horribly wrong. Maybe you can play king e7, but it's still going to be dangerous, right? Bishop c5. You can come this way, I guess.
Yep.
Interesting. Let me do this first. Bishop c5, bishop d6, now queen h8. You can still come here,
Yep.
but there's this.
This queen g7 is not good enough.
Your rook hangs, right? So this line is a problem if black doesn't have the move that black has here. Queen g8, right? So queen g8 in many, many lines, but most particularly this one, is the key defensive resource. And now in my head, I had seen all of this. You can still get my e5 pawn, but this time my rook is defended by my queen. Black is winning. So white's winning try involves getting rid of this queen g8 defensive idea.
So rook b1.
Rook b1 is exactly correct. And if I go queen a2,
And I'm gonna go
rook a1, and if queen b3, rook eb1, and if queen d5, rook d1, and this is what I had misevaluated. Here I thought black would be close to winning. Turns out white is slightly better.
That's what I was trying to calculate.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure you did this.
Yeah, so my evaluation of this position was just wrong. Turns out these threats, way too strong. Black has to give up material. And maybe I hold this endgame, maybe I don't. I don't know. Maybe I don't even find rook d2. Tough to say. I didn't analyze too deeply, but that was his only chance. Instead, he played queen h7 very quickly because he had no time on his clock. Played king f8, played queen g6, played bishop to b6, not falling for checkmate. That would not have been ideal. Literal checkmate. So we pin the bishop. And now he has to go queen f5, and it turns out chess is a draw. Instead, he played knight h7 very quickly because he had no time. Go king e7, check. Surprised him here. I came up the board rather than coming back, which was worse for some reason, which I'm already forgetting. Let's not get bogged down in the details. Check, back, takes, queen h6. And at the end of the day, once our king survives, our c-pawn also survives, and the c-pawn is going to win the day for black here. The game continued without much controversy. There was knight f8, which was a tricky move, but by this point my king is safe enough. I always have resources, multiple resources to defend. Stepped out of all the pins, invaded with the rook, invaded with the queen, and then there's one nice little flourish to end the game. There's queen c5 check, king a6, queen c4 check, king b6. If you take my bishop, this is checkmate. queen e6, and I triangulate my king, and then there's no more checks. Opponent came back, took the rook. Now I can triangulate again, but instead I go bishop b5. My opponent resigns. So very, very complicated game, and a lot to talk about in the early middle game. This is where really I think all the action happens. That's where my opponent and I spent most of our time, and then eventually I found a good moment to break through, even if the follow-ups were perhaps less than ideal. So a lot of important things to keep in mind here. There's sort of this saying that a bad plan is better than no plan at all. I don't really agree with it. But in this case, white had numerous options to find an active plan to help change the pace of the game. Knight b1, in this case, active plan. h4, in this case, another active plan. And after that, I think even here, white could have again tried to do something like b4, get active again. I think I skipped over this in the lecture for the sake of time, but numerous options for white to try to get active, try to fight back in the game, and instead sort of did nothing, let me do whatever I wanted with my pieces, and slowly but surely broke with e5, and black should have been much, much better, but then the chess game happened, and the rest is history. So any questions about this game? It was a pretty dense game, so it makes sense if you did have questions. Nothing at all?
I mean, how good was this knight b1 idea for white?
How good was it?
It didn't seem like that big a deal because you're already going knight g6, and then you already moved your knight on c6 to e7 anyway in the real game.
It's like
Bishop will just
Knight b5 is just going to be there forever.
so this position is like in engine evaluation like minus 0.2. This position is like plus 0.5. So it's a pretty big swing. So what do you want to do here with black, just for the sake of argument?
Oh, I just wasn't sure if it was such a big deal that the knight goes there because
Yeah.
knight g6 and knight to e7 and you'll just take it with the bishop.
Oh, you want to take?
I don't. That is the only way to defend
A
this
takes
square.
b5, and I'm attacking a5 forever.
Yeah, I think white's just going to take with the bishop. Well, the outpost is not so important, but your light squared bishop will actually be missed in this position. Long term, you're going to want that guy. Because again, now it becomes difficult to find an active plan for black, right? Your plan revolved around opening up the center, but now opening up the center is likely going to be favoring the bishops, because they're bishops. They like open positions. And so without that, I mean, I think it's a small plus for white. I don't think black is like lost, but I think white is a bit better.
What were you gonna do if knight b1 was played?
I didn't see it.
Oh, okay.
Just didn't see it.
Okay.
I don't know.
What would you do now?
Yeah, I mean, your idea seems reasonable. I might do something that looks even more awkward, which is, God, it's not so easy. It's not so easy. I might even just do something ridiculous looking, like rook c8, come all the way back, and do something similar to the game now, just with my opponent having a knight on b5 instead of a knight on f1. Pretty big improvement, knight on b5 versus knight on f1, but the same plan I think still holds here. And yeah, maybe honestly, giving up the bishop, not so bad. Okay, that I think is gonna just about do it for me. Sorry we only got through one game, but it was a complicated game. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Maybe I'll go over some more games in the coming weeks, 'cause there were a lot of fun ones this tournament. If you are just tuning in, be sure to stay tuned for Unieski Quesada, our Grandmaster in Residence. I believe it's his final day here, so stick around while he's here. He's one of the best. Hopefully you guys enjoy his lecture, and as always, my name is Caleb Denby. Thank you very much for coming, and I will see you guys next week.